Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Club Grubbery, another episode about to take to the airwaves, Wednesday, the 12th of March. And John, we send our best wishes to the guy who does all the hard work for Club Grubbery and uploading all our material, Stuart Robertson in WA, who's just had a kidney removed, and he has been in a bad way with cancer in Charles Gardner Hospital in Perth. And we wish you all the best, Stuart. We've heard that the surgery went well,
And
and
he's just been subjected to a third Labor government term as well, so it's not looking
yeah,
good.
that's right. So he's got it all stacked against him. So all the best, Stuart. A lot of people are praying for you. We have with us today Jordon Dittloff, who's running for the Libertarians in Victoria, which is a pretty big ask for the Senate. And it's great to have you on, Jordan. And you come highly recommended by people of the caliber of Crystal Mitchell, who's
Yeah, Crystal's fantastic. She and I are sort of like partners in crime within the party. We have a cheeky sense of humor that we share, which I think you need to have in politics. You either laugh or you cry.
well, yeah, that's right. There's going to be a lot of crying, I hope, soon. Anyhow, we're about to talk to you briefly about your political aspirations and where you see yourself going with the Libertarians in Victoria. But we also want to unpack a bit of your background because I want to open up this by saying, I quit school at age 13. I had a criminal record by the time I was 17, and I turned my life around and rose to the top of my field in Qantas, which I'm very, very grateful for. So I want you to know that, the stuff we're going to talk about tonight is real because people need to know that we're real. And let he who is not guilty cast the first stone, Johnny.
100% right, Hoodie. And yeah, I think it's not only about seeing that some politicians are sincere and real, others are just very fake. But I'm sure we'll get to know Jordan tonight, and he can maybe tell us too at some stage throughout the program as to whether he's receiving any indirect or direct payments from Pfizer.
That'd be handy. Yes, we seem to have a whisper that someone high up in one of the uni parties has been doing that, but let's leave that until we know for sure.
It doesn't surprise me. The problem with being a conspiracy theorist in 2025 is you're running out of conspiracies. It
That's
keeps
it.
getting
That's it.
keeps getting proven true.
So, Jordan, you're running for the Libertarians. Tell us why you're running and what your hopes and dreams are. Well, I just dim the blind here.
That's all right. Yeah. So look, running for the Libertarians, I've been a member of the party for, I think, coming on close to 7 years. I was a sort of a silent member for a couple of years before COVID. I was in, so for reasons we'll come to, I was sort of in the political wilderness a bit and in the sort of hermit Obi-Wan Kenobi phase of my political life for a couple of years after 2017. But I knew that because I had previously been a member of the Liberal Party and I sort of parted ways with them late 2014 after the napthine value loss in Victoria. And yeah, I just felt like the Liberal Party had 4 years of government in Victoria. It didn't make a dent. Most Victorians wouldn't even be able to tell you that there was a 4 year period of Liberal government. It seems like all just Labor government wall to wall. And you have to remind people, no, we had two Liberal premiers in 4 years between 2010 and 2014. And you'd be forgiven for not knowing that because their net contribution, when you compare it to someone like Campbell Newman or Jeff Kennett, was absolutely very missable. Let's put it that way. And so, yeah, and this weird thing happened after that election loss in 2014, where a lot of my mates who were working as staffers for MPs that I'd been young Liberal alongside, all that sort of stuff, overnight they went from being staffers for a minister in a portfolio to the following day when it was a incoming Andrews government. We should never forget it's the weakness of that Liberal government of Ted Value and Dennis Napthine that delivered an Andrews regime that even the Labor Party didn't want. Daniel Andrews got the opposition leader gig at a cycle they weren't meant to win. His faction was sort of like given that because they all take turns to merry-go-round in the Labor Party, and no one was more distraught than members of the Labor right faction that I knew who were young Labor people when Daniel Andrews got elected. So we had a lot of like, you guys did this, what have you done? But my mates basically overnight went from being, participants in government to going, oh, Labor's mess on transport, Labor's problems, Labor's problems. I'm like, you guys have had 4 years to fix these problems that you're now identifying very clearly the day after. I'm out. Like I just realized it was, blue team good, red team bad, political football and tribalism. And I just, I've never been interested in that. I've never been, you know, I was raised to read three newspapers and you're probably going to get half the truth. A broken clock's right twice a day. And you've got to look at what the effect of something is, not what its intention is, not who's proposing it. You've got to look at what it actually does or could do in the wrong hands. And that's how I was just raised to be a critical thinker. I grew up in the country on 20 acres where mum and dad still live, and I'm lucky enough to be able to go out to where I was born and grew up. And they've got 20 acres at the edge of a rural residential zone, which is like a strip of 7 houses, and everything around is just open farmland. So everything south and east and west of mum and dad is just bush and farmland. And my two younger brothers and I, that's the upbringing we had, where we just, we'd get breakfast, we'd be out, the door would be closed at 10 o'clock, you'd hear the latch go, and we'd know to come back at, lunchtime or for dinner or whatever it happened to be. And that was about the extent of the brief. There wasn't any, don't put your foot down a rabbit hole, don't, cut your hand on something sharp, don't fall off a cliff, whatever, don't step on a snake because you worked it out. Like kids are pretty resilient and they work it out when you let them. And so I had a very practical libertarian upbringing, I think. I was lucky enough to grow up far away from government interference or involvement. And if I can keep where mum and dad live free of that for as long as I can, I will. So basically, when I got back into politics, I thought if I'm going to put in the time and effort, and if I'm going to really commit my energy and effort to something, I want it to be something that stands for my values and that I can actually feel good about getting up in the morning and knowing that I'm supporting that. I'm not going to have to constantly make apologies or make excuses for the party I represent and say, oh, look, I know they kind of threw us under the bus this time, but don't worry, when we get into government, it'll be fine. And then it's not fine. And, we saw that with Abbott federally. I think we'll see it again with Dutton, unfortunately. That's my strong feeling that, the moderates in the Liberal Party room are going to give him a good run when he's got a chance of getting elected. And then once he's in government, and if he becomes the Prime Minister with a very small majority, the moderates in the Liberal Party room will, be sharpening their knives and saying, look, you better toe the line. Otherwise, remember what happened to that guy. So that's why I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. They represent my values, which I always had, which was that, what other people do in their life, whether it's the bedroom, their business, their personal life, whatever it is none of my business as long as it's not hurting anyone else. And that's the fundamental premise. Like I support the right of every Victorian, every Australian to, pursue their life project, whatever that might be, even if it's something that I'm not into or that I don't think I would do given the choice. As long as they're not hurting anyone else, they should be free to do what they like with as little government interference as possible. So I know that sounds like a very controversial, thing to say in 2025. Feels like dangerous ideas, people start looking at you sideways if you start to talk that way. But 20 or 30 years ago, that was the way Australia was. It was not that long ago. And you guys, I know, lived in that time much more than I did. I'm a 38, so I can remember that time very, vaguely because I was quite young. But it wasn't always like this, and it can go back to the way it was much more readily than people think if we push for it.
Johnny.
Jordon, it was interesting you mentioned being sort of flung out the door by mum and dad, and there was no expectation to have to tell you what to do when you got outside. I mean, why is it that the bureaucrats and the politicians can't work it out when they get into government?
Well, look, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, John. And, politicians only can act and understand the world in terms of laws and regulations. They think that unless they pass a law saying you can do something, you can't do it. Like they think, what would people do if there wasn't a law to tell you how to think or what to think or how to deal with a situation? Whereas in reality, it's the opposite. If a law is not made about something, common sense and private initiative and private enterprise governs it. There's a bridge in Geelong, right? And I'm in Geelong at the moment, staying with a mate because I'm doing a bit of casual temping work to keep the campaign rolling along. And there's a bridge in Geelong. It's out near a place called Queen's Park, and it's a single lane bridge. And you will know these kind of bridges. If you don't know the one I'm talking about, you'll have things like this where you guys are, I'm sure, or you would have heard of them. And guess what? People work it out. There's no traffic light, there's no stop here, start there, whatever, because people know if they just go down there mad as lorries and they're not paying attention and they're not communicating with the other people on the road, they're going to get halfway down the bridge and they're going to be stuck. There's no way around. One of you is going to have to reverse. So you know what people do is they make eye contact, they wave people through, they wait, they go one after the other. And it's the same thing when the traffic lights go down, when the power's out. I just can't get over, like, I always just have the biggest chuckle to myself when you'll see some people just sitting there waiting to be told what to do, when in reality, the road rules still apply. Give way to your left, make eye contact, visually communicate with people, and be safe. Like, use your common sense. And government just can't understand that. They don't and they can't and they never will. And you can't make it different than that. You can't have better people in government and expect it's going to change because firstly, politicians might come and go, but the deep state, the public service, whatever you want to call it, and even now it's even broader with consultants and NDIS and everything, that doesn't change. Those people are still there. And not only are they still there, they resist change actively. If Dutton gets in tomorrow, he's going to be dealing with the same immigration department. He's going to be dealing with the same treasury, the same climate department, the same education department. All these people are not just going to roll over and go, you know what, government of the day, let's just forget everything we've been saying for the last 4 years. They say that, they pay lip service and, you know, they like to peddle that fiction. But the reality is that's just not what is going to happen. So libertarians don't want to get in and, pull the levers a different way. We want to get in and smash the levers. We want to stop the machine of government from being involved in as many things as it is. Because the things they're involved in today, if you told someone 30 years ago that the government would be sitting around your kitchen table essentially telling your kids what they could do, there'd be an outrage. Like people would be like, what on earth is happening? But we've become so used to reaching out and asking the government to intercede and help us like it's a deity or like it's a cult. In COVID, people said, what's the government going to do to stop death? Like it's just madness. But we keep feeding the beast. Like we are at fault as much as these bureaucrats and politicians, because the politicians respond to what the community is asking them to do. They over respond and they have this knee-jerk emotional reaction. But we ask them to do that. We are as much to blame. And that's particularly true here in Victoria, where I'm running for the Senate.
So what's your position on mandates and the way the pandemic was handled or mishandled?
Well, it's funny you asked that, Graham, because today, very belatedly, 5 years later, the Australian Human Rights Commission released a report confirming that the rights of all Australians, but in particular the rights of Victorians, were trampled upon during COVID, that it went beyond any sense of proportionality, of cost benefit. The entire nation was thrown into, its economy was thrown into a deep freeze, civil liberties were trodden over, and the future generations of Australia were saddled with this enormous debt funded by printed money, which let the inflation genie out of the bottle. Like, there could not have been a worse, less evidence-based, less in the best interests of our country response to what turned out for most people to be a pretty bad cold. And the people that it was the most harmful towards were a vulnerable segment of society that could have either been protected with targeted measures or, at the end of the day, an acceptance made that there is going to be some cost to society in order to survive this and move through. You cannot just say that there's no price that can be put on the deaths of some during a pandemic. You can't just say our objective is zero deaths, which is what happened here in Victoria for years. And we're still feeling the effects of it now. Many Victorians, and especially many Victorians in our party and many within the freedom movement who did reject coercive mandates, which are still in place for, organisations like fire services, if you go to work in nursing homes, things of that nature, and they call them different things and they say, oh, it's employer by employer, and they've passed legislation that permits that and allows it, but it's still coercion and economic siege warfare. So it's just obscene that it ever happened. And I think that, those Australians and Victorians who were able to resist that direct attack on their livelihood and their free will deserve the utmost respect.
Well, one of the most egregious acts of any government has been the long-running saga at Fire Rescue Victoria, where these guys are still locked out of their jobs from fighting fires. It makes no sense. We've got this union boss marshal who couldn't run a hot bath, but nobody seems to want to take him on. What can the Libertarian Party do to shake these unions up so that common sense it prevails in places where there was obviously they admitted they did a risk assessment. And that risk assessment said that you could die from the vaccine, but they didn't pass it on.
No, well, John, the CFA is basically in the ongoing process of a takeover from the United Firefighters Union, that has the Metro Fire Brigades very much under heel, and they would love for the CFA not to exist in the form it does now. That's the honest truth. And they saw this, I think, as an opportunity to really squeeze out dissenting, kind of troublemaking voices within the volunteer arm of the Victorian fire response. When it comes to unions and industrial relations, initially, if we're successful in our objectives at this election and gaining a couple of Senate seats, or two or three would be amazing, but one or two is probably our most likely outcome. If we're successful, we won't immediately be able to directly take steps in this regard. But what we can do is we can appeal to the better angels of the Liberal Party, and we can be like the Greens are to the Labor Party, where they drag the Labor Party to their ideals of basically socialism. And they actually kind of make the Labor Party behave in more left-wing ways. The Libertarian Party can drag the Liberal Party and give them that sort of, give straw man the heart and the courage. So the lion, the courage, like give the Liberal Party this kind of covering fire almost to say, hey, Australians expect you to tackle productivity. They expect you to tackle industrial relations. You can't keep running from the Howard years forever. But they've ceded the field, John. They've a Liberal opposition or government, either, you can name it, haven't spoken about industrial relations reform since 2007. And that was when I really, I was 19, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I was 19 in 2007. And, I remember watching that election and just seeing the Liberals learn all the wrong lessons from it. And basically they've just turned tail and ran, and we've been paying the price ever since. They ceded the field on fiscal responsibility and keeping a balanced budget. The last couple of years of Howard were just as spend crazy as Kevin Rudd ended up being. People forget that. They created the Work Choices Act, but then that paved the way for the Fair Work Act. So they basically brought the federal government into what had previously been a state area, and then they laid the foundation for the Labor Party to come through and use that precedent to build a framework that was far less beneficial for Australia's long-term interests. So, the reality is that if Liberal Party voters, if Australians want to see a more sensible, collaborative, Australia's best interests, not the union's best interests, not John Setka's best interests, not even individual workers' best interests. Because, I know people who are union members working on union sites in government jobs in Victoria, and they're embarrassed about the kind of money they're earning. Like, they actually feel bad. They know that it's not sustainable. And they know deep down, even though they're taking the benefit and they're acting on the incentive, which is not something you can criticize anyone for. Like, if you leave the gate open in the farm between paddocks and the sheep go from one paddock to the other, you don't yell at the sheep, you yell at whoever left the gate open. And that's what our governments have done. Successive governments have done.
Oh boy, what's your position on the Australian Constitution of 1901? Do you think it's been trashed?
I think the biggest crimes that have been committed against our Australian Constitution is against federalism. So our founding fathers were smart enough to know that they needed to have checks and balances on the federal government they were creating. The layer of government they were creating over previously sovereign colonies that were basically their own countries. So Victoria, New South Wales, their parliaments were sovereign. They were basically independent countries. So when Australia's 6 original founding states came together, it was basically 6 sovereign states, federating and combining and delegating off some lawmaking power to the federal government where they thought they needed it. Now, what they knew was that new system of government would need to have checks and balances. And that's why the Senate is the state's house. The seat that I'm running for in Victoria is one of 6 seats up for election this time around. And the way that the Senate was meant to work is it's got full lawmaking powers. It can't originate spending. That's the only thing that it can't do that the lower house can do. But in every other respect, the Senate is equal to the House of Representatives. And it's meant to be the state's house to look after the interests of the state and the state's citizens. So if you're a senator from Victoria, you're not meant to be a Libertarian senator from Victoria first, or a Labor or Liberal senator from Victoria first. You're meant to be a Victorian senator first. And I think that we've lost our way and we've allowed the federal government to just expand into areas that our founding fathers never envisaged, that they have no right or real even reason to be involved in. The Federal Department of Education employs 0 teachers, right? They are a parasitic entity that exists only to funnel money that's taken from the states back to the states, but at a loss. Because it's about, I think it's about 170 million. I'd have to double check the budget again, but the actual cost of just administering the Federal Department of Education is a sunk cost in wasted bureaucracy that adds no value. And if you say, well, what about the national curriculum or what about NAPLAN or whatever? I don't know if you've paid attention to the results from the national curriculum and NAPLAN of late, but Australians are falling behind in every key metric, and it's just been an abject failure. And so I think that the biggest way that the Constitution has been damaged and vandalized is this creeping, steady expansion. The external affairs power in the Franklin River Dam case is another one. So I'm a legally trained person. I've graduated my legal studies at the end of 2023. And, the way that the federal government has been able to rely on a collusive, very broad interpretation by the High Court to, in every instance, expand the federal government's power at the expense of the states, whether it was taking income tax after World War II that never got returned, whether it's special purpose grants, whether it's the external affairs power, or any number of mechanisms that the federal government basically uses to muscle out and control. And we saw that during COVID with the COAG, the Council of Australian Governments, which is a non-constitutionally based body that essentially exists for the federal government to co-opt and control state areas like health, police and education and other areas that are just not even federal responsibility. So in that sense, yes, I think fortunately Australians have been too sensible to really go with a lot of constitutional reform proposals. They've rejected almost all of the proposed referenda that have been put before them, and good. I think it's great, and I think we've seen with the voice referendum, we can always rely on the common sense of everyday Australians. I don't think that's dead. I just think it's suppressed, and I think that the powers that be are really taking advantage of a lot of apathy.
What are your thoughts on exiting the World Health Organization and Australia essentially not signing up to the international health regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. So we should be exiting the World Health Organization. We should be defunding and exiting the UN, to be quite frank. We should be leaving the Paris Climate Accords. All of these things have nothing to do with Australia's interests. I often say, because you get asked all these questions when you're running for office, what do you think about Ukraine? What do you think about Gaza? All this sort of stuff. I don't care. And I don't think Australian taxpayer money should be spent in these places where we can't even see how it's being spent by third parties or other governments. I don't trust our government to spend the money when we can see where they're spending it. And that's been rorted and time and again, waste, inefficiencies, priorities being wrong, so I don't trust them to spend it here. I certainly don't trust them to spend it on vanity and prestige projects overseas. So I think that when it comes to both Australia's foreign aid, military aid, and our foreign policy more generally, I think that we far too often like to see ourselves as this sort of world player and, strut around on the stage at the taxpayer's expense, while at the same time, Richard Marles, so again, I'm in the seat of Corio right now, which is Richard Marles' seat, he's the foreign minister. And he is on the front line in Ukraine in flak jacket and camo, proudly touting that he's given a total of $1.1 billion in funds and material and, Bushmasters and other suppliers to the Ukraine. And there are parts of Corio, this electorate, that are a second or third world country in terms of socioeconomic demographics. Like there are Australians that are overwhelming food banks, that are basically struggling to either choose between paying rent or mortgage, more likely rent, because most Australians can't afford a home anymore, their grocery bill, and filling up the petrol in their car. And we know that because before Christmas, the Libertarian Party did I'm not sure if you guys saw this, we did a stunt where we basically paid for the fuel excise tax for an hour. That was done at the seat of the suburb of Cranbourne in the southeast of Melbourne. And that's an area like Corio where there's a lot of people struggling. And we promoted this, with a couple of hours notice in the morning. And we had cars lining up 15 minutes before around the corner, like for further than the eye could see, to basically fill up cars in some instances that they hadn't filled up for a month because they couldn't afford to. Like we had people doing it really tough with jerry cans and things like that, filling up petrol because petrol was 99 cents for unleaded without the government excise for that hour. So people are doing it tough. And, fair enough, you can say, well, look, we can help others. We can try to save a drowning person if we ourselves are fine, but we're not fine. And the government just doesn't, like, if you or I had a household budget that was in the red, you wouldn't be going, I'm going to go and give the neighbor something. Like, you just would not be able to do that because you'd be sacrificing your own family and your children for the sake of someone else. As noble as that would be, it would be irresponsible. But when you look at the Australian government, they gleefully, put our money into this kind of bonfire of ego and vanity.
Mm. Different parties, I know, Jordan, but when you look at people like Senator Gerard Rennick and Senator Malcolm Roberts, I mean, people were never interested in the Senate previously. I mean, you couldn't. I mean, you speak to people, they wouldn't even be able to tell you who the hell was in there. You look at people like Jared. Now they've got 250,000 Facebook followers, and there's a good reason for that. Is because they're making these bureaucrats accountable. They're holding these idiots to account in these estimate hearings, and they are really doing a good job. Are they people you look up to?
I think that they certainly set the tone and the example for what is possible. And I think that you're right. Increasingly, people are realizing that the Senate does have a lot of power. The minor right crossbench, and even not the minor right crossbench, the Greens occasionally, like I said, a broken clock's right twice a day. They opposed the hate speech laws that the government and the Liberal Party colluded to propose recently. They proposed amendments to try to make them better. I think in the end, the Greens did vote with the government after their amendments failed, which boggles my mind. But like Senator Payman, right? Fatima Payman, former Labor senator from WA, she voted against these hate speech laws. Tammy Tyrrell also voted against the hate speech laws, and Ralph Babbitt and Gerard Rennick as well. So,
Alexander.
Alex Antich, absolutely. Now he unfortunately, I don't see him still being in the Liberal Party in another 5 or 6 years. But hopefully, if I'm elected to the Senate and the Libertarian Party has a federal presence again, we can have some positive conversations because I think Alex is a fine man, and he really has stood on principle at great cost to himself and his future career. I think in a way a lot of people don't realise. But so even though Jared is from a different party, you might have seen in recent weeks, I've led and the Libertarians have really helped to organise the Australia First Alliance, which is an alliance of minor parties who are sort of freedom oriented, who want to preference other freedom-oriented parties before the majors, who share sort of common ground when it comes to free speech, when it comes to lower taxes, and when it comes to COVID justice, for example. And we're hopeful that there may be more to come before the federal election. But certainly after the federal election, we'd love to continue using that vehicle to sort of do the kind of cooperation and collaboration that should have happened 2 years ago.
I want to pay my respects to a guy who's running in New South Wales by the name of Stuart Howe, who was pushing for years to have that system of voting brought in that you're talking about, this alliance. And I'm really glad for him that someone's actually going to implement these ideas. He's been pushing it for a long, long time, very
I think
passionate.
Stuart might have sent me a message on X, I think. I'm not sure if I got a chance to reply to him, but I think he helped inform Gerard Rennick's thinking on it a little bit. But yeah, I think Stuart sort of said to me that he was the sort of original sort of thinker of it. But I think the problem that has always existed is that unfortunately it's a bit of a Mexican standoff where historically parties like One Nation, parties like, whatever Clive Palmer's vehicle of the day is, all think that they can just basically hold on and crash through and be the Greens of the right on their own. And unfortunately, that's not the way that the major parties have designed the system. They've designed the system relying on parties that otherwise have a lot in common that cumulatively add up to about 16% of the vote in most states, which is enough to win a Senate seat outright. They've relied on fractious infighting and lack of cooperation. And I worry that at this election, we might see the ultimate cost of that. There's a world, I hope it doesn't happen, but there's a world where, our party, Jared Rennick, Malcolm Roberts, are all competing for the sixth Senate spot in Queensland. There's a world where nobody gets it. And we get 3 Liberals, 2 Labor, and a Green, or 3 Liberals, 1 Labor, 1 Green, 1 legalise cannabis, God forbid, like this is a timeline that could happen. And if it does happen, it's only because One Nation didn't see the value in cooperating earlier when I first proposed this idea 2 years ago. So hopefully the lessons learned and the positive benefits of collaboration don't come at great cost. And we can all sit down in the Senate on the other side of this and work towards it. But I fear that may be the case.
In the few minutes that we've got left, politics is a filthy game. It's a dirty game. The mainstream media love playing in the mud with it, and so will your opposition. And I, for one, put a lot of stock in candidates who are totally honest about where they've come from and what they've done. And so I'd like you to use the next 5 or 6 minutes, Jordon, because I know that a lot of stuff has been thrown at you and will continue to be thrown at you. And I want to give you an opportunity to put a sword through all the gossip that there is out there, that may be out there about you. So tell us a bit of your backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, from the very beginning, I've really worn this on my sleeve, not only for my political campaign, but for my life the last 10 years as I've rebuilt it. I mentioned before I've finished my legal studies and I've been granted a compliance certificate stating that I'm a fit and proper person to practice law, which was just an incredible achievement, given that, the reality is this time 9 years ago, I was sitting in a prison cell. In my 20s, I struggled with drug and alcohol addiction from sort of age 19 onwards. Alcohol first, but then later other recreational drugs. And I'd have periods of time where I wouldn't be using, but then the cycle just sort of kept rearing its head and renewing itself. And in addition to that, I made some very poor, well, in addition and related to that, I made some very poor business decisions, and I sort of tried to overextend myself and run before I could walk. And this is a story common to many young would-be business owners. But I borrowed money to start a business, and then under the weight of that debt, but also drug and alcohol addiction, I was trading insolvent for a couple of years. I was kind of like looking clients and customers in the eye and sort of telling them they'd get trips that they'd paid for. But then in the end, when the business finally failed, there were many people left not having received what they paid for. And so that kind of led to, I guess, my life really unraveling on the public stage, and so my fall from grace is very much a matter of public record. And I ended up getting sentenced to 27 months in prison for the combination of drug-related offending and offences relating to my former small business. So at that point, I very clearly remember sitting in Port Phillip Prison, which is a maximum security prison here in Victoria. And at that time, I just remember thinking that all my life held ahead for me was more drugs, more reoffending, and that was like the sum of my life, of what my life was going to be. And then there was just something in me that, I really, really clearly remember just feeling like I didn't want to give up, that I didn't want to kind of let that sort of voice win, and that, I sort of wanted to overcome the expectations that would be my life would amount to. And, slowly but surely, I started thinking more than one foot in front of the other. I started thinking an hour ahead, a day ahead, a month ahead. And then I started going to the gym when I was in prison. I started my business degree, studying that remotely. I was studying with 1 hour of internet access a week, where I had to tell someone, like a prison officer, like I had to actually direct them what to click on and what to type, but like I couldn't touch the computer screen. So I did the first half of my business degree in that environment. And I got out of prison. I did my parole period. I started managing a busy bakery cafe, the Beechworth Bakery, in first Ballarat and then Bendigo. And I just proved myself to my employers. I disclosed everything fully to everyone important in my life and to my employers as well. And that's a shield, like disclosing and taking charge of my narrative and being upfront about what happened. The response from Australians almost without exception. I can count on my hand in the last 10 years the amount of people who have dismissed me out of hand because of my past, or who have had a negative reaction that lasted. Australians love the idea that someone is being upfront about their mistakes, that they're having a go at turning it around, and that they are trying to work through and trying to rebuild their life. And if you just read the Herald Sun or this, or if you just kind of listened to the kind of the worst of society, and the way that you can sometimes hear cancel culture and stuff being expressed, you wouldn't think that that's what Australians are like, and how Australians are, but they are. And I've just been incredibly humbled and grateful. And just at every turn where I've thought that I would face a brick wall, I've faced green lights instead, and people prepared to support me and encourage me. And, like, it's just, it's been such an incredible journey. And it's also been really important to me to be repaying my victims. So my prison sentence, a lot of people would say, oh, you serve your time and, never look back. But in reality, the time I spent in prison didn't help the people that I harmed. And as a libertarian and as someone who believes in those values, I knew that I had to make amends directly and actually start the process of repaying those debts. For me to actually walk down the street with my head up and to be able to sort of know that I was doing the right thing and putting my values into action. That was a process I started when I was in prison. It was $50 a month on my prison salary for the first kind of 12 months. And then as my life improved, and as I was able to afford to pay more, I was able to pay back more. And so far today, I've repaid approximately $40,000 of the roughly 250,000 that was owing. So, it's still a long journey ahead, and it's still a process that I'm committed to, and that whatever happens with this election, I'm either going to be starting on a promising law career, hopefully, or potentially in the Senate. I'll be redoubling my efforts and making sure that as my life improves, I can continue to make those amends. And it'll be a great feeling of satisfaction, not just for me, but for the community, and for, if my wife and I are able to start a family, to be able to say to my kids, hey, look, you can make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah.
There's very few things in this world you can do that you can't fix. And
what was the tipping point for you? Where did
so
you actually turn around?
I think that for me, it was this feeling that, I'd hit rock bottom. Like I was sitting in a prison cell, and I hadn't spoken to my family for a couple of months at that time, not because they didn't want to speak to me, but because I was really ashamed, and I just felt like, the world had collapsed around me, and the sky had fallen in, and that, like life was over. That's how I felt. And then I honestly, I couldn't tell you what it was, but something just, it was like I felt like I was just clinging to this kind of driftwood in a dark ocean, being buffeted by waves. That's how it felt. Like, it was like I was just hanging on for dear life, but I wasn't ready to let go. And I don't know, call it stubbornness, call it, high power, whatever it might be. Something just, kept saying within myself, like, this isn't the end. This isn't how the story finishes. And then, yeah, as I just started slowly but surely having small wins, and then slightly bigger wins and stuff like that, prior to 2015, I'd really never finished something I'd started. I was that sort of kid that I was always running around. I was always, trying to run before I could walk. I always had older friends. Like, I was always trying to find a shortcut. And I was always, I had this teacher in high school who said, he was an American guy. He goes, Jordan, you're an example of ability failing to connect with drive. And like, that stung because it was true, and I sort of knew it was true. But I'd always kind of been able to just stay ahead of consequences, or kind of fall on my feet. I had more luck than anyone doing as many things wrong as I had the right to have. But eventually my luck ran out, and I sort of had to wake up to myself, and I had to actually, and I think the other big thing, not long after that feeling of like, okay, I'm going to rebuild, was coming to terms with the effect my actions had on other people, on people around me, close to me, who didn't make the decisions that I did, who had to deal with the consequences, even though they didn't make the choices. And that's, my parents, both really law-abiding, quiet, humble people. Dad was a police officer for 19 years, and as you can imagine, the impact on him, was immense. My younger brothers both had to deal with the impact of my decisions in their careers and life, and facing questions and all that sort of stuff. And I think that when I could sort of rationalize it as, it's just me, it's pay to play, I can sort of make the choices and deal with the consequences, there's a different calculus. But when I realized that at the end of the day, it wasn't just about me, that was when I think I sort of went from being a kid into a young man. And, 27 might be a late time to do that, but I think it's the time many young men become men, you know. And I think there's a lot of young men out there now, looking at the Andrew Tates of the world and National Socialist Network and Socialist Alliance and all this sort of, all these kind of really, really bad sources of advice and sources of, what the world should be and is. And I think one of the reasons I'm running, and really ultimately the main reason I'm running, is because like I don't like what I think the world looks like in 10 years if I don't. Like for me, I'm in the beginning of a legal career. My wife and I are hoping to have kids very soon, so in a way, it's like the worst possible time for me, objectively. If anyone wants to say, well, what's the checklist and, what's the right time, now would not be it. But I think if I don't run, then we're just going to keep getting what we've got, and we're going to keep getting people who have no skin in the game, people who've never had to work for anything, who can't relate to people, who have never had skin come off, or had hardship and struggles. And that's what I'm hearing from the voters when I'm speaking to them. They say, like, I would rather someone who has made mistakes like you and owns them and is honest about them than someone who's had a silver spoon in their mouth their entire life, like Malcolm Turnbull or Scott Morrison. That's the feedback I'm getting.
We'd love to continue this. We've got another interview coming up with someone in the UK, and you've got another interview to go to. And we just want to wish you well. And I'm going to close with a prayer to my higher power, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I need all the help I can get still.
Dear Lord Father in heaven, please grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is and not as I would have it, and trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I can be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever and the next. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
It certainly sounds like you've walked some similar roads, I think, to me. And
I have, mate, and
hearing, yeah,
my wife and I have been running 12-step recovery ministry for 20 years. So
yeah,
I know exactly where you're coming from, and you have the strength of your conviction. You've stepped out of your denial, which is an admirable thing. You're making amends. You're doing all the things that people do to set their life on a new course. I know because I've done it, Jordan. So I just want you to know that we're all a work in progress, mate, and God bless you for that. So we'll get you back on. We'd love to talk a little bit more about that. But Johnny, in the meantime, you've often been heard to say.
You just couldn't make this stuff up. And I'm hopeful, Hoodie, he gets elected, there's a baby, and then a movie deal to pay these people.
There's a good idea.
that's yeah. I'm gonna have to. Yeah, I hope next time I join you guys, it's from a red seat in the Senate. So, thank you very much.
All the best to you, mate. And don't forget, everyone, stay out of the trees. What you did yesterday got you to today, and it's still a great country because you live in it. God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Club Grubbery. Bye for now.
See you guys.